Okay, Chapter 19, the heart. We're going to continue talking about the cardiovascular system, and this chapter moves us into the pump for this system, which is the heart. The heart of a healthy person is going to pump about 1,900 gallons of its fluid every day. That's a rate of about 5 liters per minute. For a lot of people, it's going to pump for over 75 years. The cool thing about it, during exercise, the amount of blood, the fluid increases, and the heart will match the increase that's needed. The area that studies the heart is known as cardiology, and that's going to be the medical specialty that is going to be concerned with diagnosing and treating heart disease. When we look at the heart is actually 2 pumps in one. On the left side, we have our systemic circuit, and on the right, the pulmonary circuit. For the systemic circuit, this is going to be pumping blood through our systemic circulation, meaning going to all the parts of the body. As it does that, it's going to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the tissues of the body. When we begin to look at the right side of the heart, known as the pulmonary circuit, this is receiving the blood from the body where it's gone through the tissues, and it's going to pump the blood back to the heart, and it's going to send it through the pulmonary circuit. So when it gets to the lungs, you're going to be able to drop off the CO2 and pick up oxygen. When we look at the size or the shape of the heart and its location, we're going to find the heart located in the mediastinum. That's the midline portion of the thoracic cavity. It's good to know and important to know the placement of the heart, because when you begin to do clinicals and so forth, you need to know where to place the stethoscope. Also, it's good to know its position in case of CPR, that sort of thing. Now, when we begin to look at the structure of the heart, we have what's called the pericardium. The pericardium, it's also known as the pericardial sac, SAC. And this is a double-walled sac that's going to enclose the heart. The good thing about it, it helps to reduce the friction. If something goes wrong with this pericardial sac, the term is pericarditis. It's a very painful inflammation of the membranes around the heart. And I've heard that people who suffer from it, they actually can feel their heart beating, and I've heard that it's very painful. When we look at the two membranes, we have what's termed the parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium. That means we're going to have in the visceral pericardium, that sac, that membrane is covering and it's following the contours of the heart. The outer layer is the pericardial. In between these two membranes, that's our pericardial cavity. And that cavity is filled with the fluid, anywhere from about 5 to 30 milliliters, and that's helping keep it reducing the friction. In this parietal pericardium, we have a fibrous layer, and then of course we get into the serous layer, the one that will begin to secrete the fluid. The fibrous layer, that sac is very protective because it's going to cover those great vessels that are around the heart. Also, it's going to help the heart from over distending when it beats. When we look at that sac, on the inferior portion, it's going to be attached to the diaphragm, so it actually helps also with the attachment and keeping the heart in its place. As we begin to look at what's called the heart wall, the heart wall has 3 layers. It's going to have epicardium, myocardium, endocardium, outer, middle, inner. The epicardium is also called visceral pericardium, and that's because it's a very thin serous membrane, and it's making up a smooth outer surface to the heart. In some places, there will be adipose tissue, and that's serving as a protection to the heart. And in this layer of the epicardium, we're going to find our coronary blood vessels. And those coronary blood vessels are supplying this heart wall, the muscle of the heart, the structure of the heart, with its blood flow. And that becomes extremely important. The endocardium, that's going to actually be a layer of simple squamous epithelium, and it's over a layer of connective tissue. This helps create a smooth inner lining, and we're going to see that it helps with lining of the heart and the blood vessels. It's going to also cover the valve surfaces, the tricuspid and the bicuspid, and we're going to have it continuous with the coverings of the blood vessels. This is a view of the pericardium showing you how we have, if we take this little section, blow that up, we get this double layer membrane. In between is the cavity. We have our pericardial sac with the fibrous layer. They're trying to show you fibers here where it will help, run continuous with the vessels. They're showing the epicardium right there on that covering of the heart. Down here, as we begin to move to the inner portion of the heart, they're showing us a picture of a valve. They're showing this very thick area right here, and we're going to find this thick layer, and that's the myocardium. That's actually the working portion of the heart, because that's where you're going to find the cardiac cells. We're going to have that cardiac muscle. So to this outer portion, we have our epicardium. This is making up the myo, and then this inner portion running along the inside of this cavity, that's going to be our endocardium. The chambers that make up the heart, there, and please do not leave my class saying anything other than 4 chambers. There are 4 chambers to the heart. We have the atria, we have the ventricles. There are 2 chambers. The 2 atria are on the top to the superior portion. The ventricles are the inferior chambers. When we begin to look more closely at the vessels, the atria receive blood. So blood that has to return to the heart is going to return to the right and the left atria. The atria have something called these little flap-like pieces on it, and those are going to be the auricles. Those are simply an extension of the atria, and they can be seen between the atria and the ventricles. The ventricles, as we look at those ventricles, the ventricles have a thicker look to them. One side of the heart, the left, is thicker than the side to the right. So that's going to be pumping the blood. So when we look at the ventricles, blood is pumped from the ventricles. On the right side of the heart, it doesn't have very far to go. So we don't have a lot of muscle on the right side because the right side has to go to the lungs. So it's not under as great of a pressure, so it doesn't need to pump as hard. On the left side of the heart, it's thicker for the muscle portion, and this is because the blood that gets pumped from the left side has to go through the aorta and go to all the areas of the body. So that's going to actually be under greater pressure. And you have to have that strong heart muscle so that you can get a good enough pump to push that blood out and through all the areas of the body. When we begin to look at the chambers, if you remember the term sulcus, that's like a groove, okay? And when you look at those, we have what's termed the atrioventricular sulcus. Simply begin to take the terms apart. This particular sulcus is separating atria from the ventricles. We have an interventricular sulcus. This one is for the ventricles, and it's going to divide the right from the left ventricle. The sulci that we find, those are going to contain the coronary arteries. That becomes important when we begin to look at the blood circulation to the heart muscle itself. For the atria, we're going to have what's termed the intra-atrial septa. So there's going to be a septum in between the atria. We're going to find pectinate muscles. Pectinate muscles, these are going to be on this interior of the auricles, and we'll see them as being part of the atrial wall. They're going to have muscular ridges that are in them. For the interventricular septum, that's going to be the area separating those ventricles. The trabeculae carnae, once again, muscular ridges and columns. You'll be able to see them when we dissect the heart, and they're going to be on that interior wall of the ventricles, and it's believed that they could help keep those ventricle walls from sticking together after the heart contracts. This is a larger view of those chambers. Study this picture. This is going to be something that you need to be familiar with. I want you to be familiar with the valves that are being represented. I want you to understand right versus left. I want you to understand atria versus the ventricles. This is kind of giving you an idea. This little ridge line running right here, that's giving you an idea of that trabeculae carnae. As we look at some of these other structures, you can see that we have like some papillary muscles. These are going to be called the chordae tendineae or tendinous cords. This is something that you're definitely going to have to become familiar with, because you are going to have to dissect a heart and you're going to have to label the heart. As we move into talking about the valves, the biggest purpose for the valves is to ensure one-way blood flow. If we end up having blood back up or backflow through the heart, that is really not a good thing to have happen. So the valves are going to be important to ensure that one-way blood flow.